Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into a really critical examination of Mexican organized crime. We're trying to look beyond just the headline violence to see how cartels are strategically challenging the state, both politically and culturally.
Right. And the central question that seems to emerge from the material we've looked at is this. What's the primary engine of cartel power right now? Is maybe the biggest, most potent threat their highly successful digital and cultural warfare, this whole narco-influencer thing? Or is it something more fundamental? Is it the structural failure and the deep corruption within the Mexican state itself, what people call narco-politics?
Exactly. And I'll be arguing that, the ascent of this narco branding, this digital influence, it really represents the most adaptive and immediate operational challenge. It's how they're achieving mass recruitment and, crucially, cultural normalization today.
And that's where I think we see things differently. I'd maintain that the enduring power of these groups, it's fundamentally rooted in that institutional decay you mentioned. While the digital tactics are flashy, definitely visible, they're still just tactics. They only really work because systemic corruption provides this necessary blanket of impunity. Without the narco-politicians essentially clearing the path, the digital spectacle might just be localized noise, not a genuine threat to the state's sovereignty.
That's an interesting way to frame it. But let me offer maybe a slightly different perspective on this digital evolution. Because the shift we've seen, it goes, I think, far beyond the kind of analog propaganda of the past. If you think about the era of narco-corridos, right, those ballads that romanticize traffickers, that was really about mythologizing. It turned someone like El Chapo into this distant, almost larger-than-life figure.
Okay.
What we have now is, it's sophisticated narco-marketing, even narco-branding, and it's amplified by algorithms. This content, it doesn't just mythologize, it normalizes the lifestyle. So when young people see these viral videos, maybe from Los Chapitos, showing off, stacks of cash, expensive cars, exotic pets, it presents the criminal life not as some far-off legend, but as an immediate, desirable, and maybe most importantly, accessible reality. And this is incredibly effective for, talent acquisition. The data is genuinely chilling. By 2021, some estimates suggested up to, 30,000 teenagers had been recruited by cartels? That sheer scale, it demonstrates that this modern, adaptive digital strategy poses a really formidable operational challenge that, frankly, traditional law enforcement just isn't equipped to handle.
It's difficult to ignore those numbers, that sheer recruitment figure. But I still wonder, though, if that technological advantage isn't really just masking a simpler, maybe more fundamental problem. What makes that mass recruitment even viable, if not the basic failure of the state itself? Look, the cartel's digital success, this ability to spin a criminal act into some kind of aspirational lifestyle, it's fundamentally enabled by a deeply corrupted political and legal infrastructure. Those glossy TikToks, they're only possible because a corrupted state provides systemic high-level impunity. Their power is rooted in their ability to operate with the complicity of really high-ranking officials. We're not just talking about, low-level bribery here. We are talking about deep political penetration. Think about Genaro Garcia Luna, the former Secretary of Public Security, or former governors of key states like Tamaulipas and Michoacán, even a president-elect of a state Supreme Tribunal of Justice, all credibly linked to criminal organizations. This is the very definition of narco-politics.
Okay.
And this complicity, it allows cartels to enforce a kind of parallel system of governance. Sometimes they even step into, say, moderate street crime in areas where the state has completely failed. The state simply cannot effectively combat the digital threat when its own security and legal institutions are so fundamentally compromised. It makes the digital warfare aspect feel more like, sponsored content operating within a protected institutional bubble.
I absolutely agree that structural corruption provides the fertile ground, no question. But the modern mechanism of evasion and their operational effectiveness today, I think, is heavily technological. The cartels have, in effect, weaponized the very architecture of social media itself to make sure their message gets through, bypassing almost any attempt at control.
How so, specifically?
While they use sophisticated coded communication. Think about like the rooster emoji, Caparu, referencing El Mencho of the CGNG, or the pizza emoji, pizza, Cha Pizza, referencing El Chapo's sons. This constantly shifting symbolic language, combined with using disposable, unofficial accounts, it lets them sidestep the kind of centralized, keyword-based content moderation systems the platforms rely on. It's a stunningly effective and frankly cynical use of modern communication. This decentralized, coded approach, it forces platforms into what one expert described as an unwinnable game of whack-a-mole. Their propaganda stays viral, it stays pervasive, and it's almost impossible to fully stamp out, regardless of which politician might be on the cartel payroll. That ability to evade sophisticated AI moderation, that feels like a critical, self-sustaining capability we have to address directly.
The tactics are innovative, no doubt. But look closely at what these advanced digital tools are actually deployed for. More often than not, they serve the existing physical violent power structure, a structure that is fundamentally shielded by that political complicity we talked about. Take the sophisticated digital operations needed for targeted killings. The murder of the narco-influencer Camilo Ochoa really illustrates this perfectly. To find him, the rival faction La Maitza, they didn't just track his social media posts, no. They hired a specialized hacker to trace his physical location by exploiting a link that his wife opened. So the digital operation was a tool, yes, a surgical strike tool.
Right.
But the real failure is what happened next. The execution itself required operational freedom in the physical world. Sicarios, assassins, entered a private, secured residential area in Cuernavaca, a city, far outside the usual cartel heartlands, shot him multiple times, and then just escaped. Without any state interception, the ability to hire a world-class hacker and then deploy assassins freely in a supposedly secure zone, that highlights the fundamental failure of state security of local governance. It suggests cartels have co-opted high-level intelligence and security capabilities, turning digital targeting into lethal reality. And that's only possible, I argue, with systemic corruption providing the necessary immunity.
But doesn't that bring us back to the operational core? If the cartel can contract high-level cyber expertise and then use that to bypass physical security measures, isn't that proof that the technological threat, its speed, its global reach, the co-option of intelligence capabilities, isn't that the sharpest edge of the problem now? It seems to accelerate violence in a way that corruption alone doesn't fully explain.
Maybe it accelerates it, but corruption provides the runway. And when we talk about the broader societal impact, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the digital sphere is the primary battleground for legitimacy. The cartels, they strategically perform these quasi-state functions, but in the physical world, specifically to win hearts and minds. That's challenging state legitimacy at its very foundation.
Okay, like the aid distribution?
Exactly. They distribute aid, food, medicine during natural disasters, and they publicize these acts widely. This isn't just good PR, it's a direct structural challenge. It positions the cartel as a more reliable, more effective, maybe even more benevolent provider of social welfare than the actual government in some areas. They cultivate that classic Robin Hood image. And this fostered dependency, especially among marginalized youth, is critical. Because for many of them, the narco lifestyle offers one of the only visible paths to wealth and power in a system marked by huge systemic inequality, what some sociologists call the bulimic society, right? It dangles consumerism but denies the legitimate means to get there. This structural economic failure is what makes the digital glamour effective, not the other way around.
That's a very compelling point about the structural failure, definitely. But I would frame the state's reaction, or lack thereof, a bit differently. The government's inability to effectively respond to this erosion of its own legitimacy, I see that as a direct consequence of the digital threat outpacing their traditional law enforcement tools and strategies. Think about the policy swings, from the non-confrontational hugs not bullets approach, which, might be necessary for addressing social roots, but is clearly ineffective against the immediate criminal threat, to reviving the flawed kingpin strategy, which often just creates power vacuums and sparks more violence. Both approaches seem completely ill-suited for a 21st century information war. Yes, targeting the root causes of poverty is vital, absolutely, but it doesn't dismantle the immediate viral propaganda machine that is actively recruiting right now.
But is the propaganda the core issue or symptom?
I think it's becoming a core driver. The digital realm forces the issue onto the international stage. It's the primary battleground where this normalization of deviance really happens, where the lifestyle is made to look appealing. You even see the US trying to fight this narrative directly using sanctions, like when they linked the CJ&G leader Ricardo Ruiz Velasco to the murder of the influencer Valeria Marquez. That strategy is an attempt to use state power to publicly expose the brutal reality behind the glamorized facade. It's an explicit counter-narrative strategy targeting their digital brand.
But even that digital realm, it seems to circle right back to political impunity. The impunity provided by the narco-political structure is precisely what turns that narco influence, that digital fame, into a fatal liability almost instantly. Look at the murders Valeria Marquez, El Pirata de Culiacán, those 8 influencers reportedly killed in the recent Los Chapitos versus La Maíza conflict. It demonstrates that these cultural figures are just assets and targets, operating in a system where violence is almost never punished.
Okay, fair point.
The state's failure to prosecute violence, what's the estimate? Something like a 99% impunity rate for homicide? That makes the role of the narco-influencer inherently perilous, often short-lived. Digital fame just makes them an easier, more visible target, and their deaths become more public spectacles. So while the digital aspect provides the stage, the mechanism of the crime, the ability to kill without consequence, relies entirely on systemic governance failure. The cartels can kill the influencer because they know the state probably won't punish the sicario or the official who maybe provided the intel.
The focus on the assassinations is actually an excellent historical lens, because you're right, the pattern of targeting cultural figures is an enduring feature. I mean, the murder of narco-corrido singers like Charlino Sanchez back in 1992 proved that publicizing the narco narrative makes you a target, regardless of the medium, analog or digital.
Exactly.
But the crucial difference today is the operational environment created by technology. Digital notoriety is instantaneous, it's global, it generates a digital trail like the one apparently used to track Camino Chihuahua that the analog world simply lacked. And the sheer scale of digital recruitment, the speed at which this propaganda spreads, it creates an adaptive, constant flow that I don't think structural corruption alone can fully explain. We're dealing with an algorithmic acceleration of a pre-existing criminal culture. It's a constant, decentralized cultural assault that makes the system inherently unstable, even if you could somehow arrest every corrupt governor tomorrow.
And that acceleration you mention is only so destructive because the state refuses or is unable to enforce its basic monopoly on force and justice. The speed doesn't matter if there are consequences.
So, to summarize my position, I maintain that the narco-influencer phenomenon represents the most critical adaptive threat right now. It weaponizes algorithms, it weaponizes social aspirations to achieve mass recruitment and cultural normalization in a way that older analog methods just couldn't match. And because of that, our counter-strategy has to prioritize proactive, context-aware digital demotion, media literacy programs, things that can disrupt that viral feedback loop before it takes root in the next generation.
And I would summarize my view by reiterating that the cartel's enduring power is fundamentally structural. The digital operations are, at the end of the day, tactics. They only succeed because a large entrenched network of high-level narco-politicians provides the necessary immunity. This allows criminal organizations to successfully challenge the state's monopoly on both force and social welfare. So combating the culture, while important, really requires first dismantling the systemic corruption that shields these organizations from any real consequences.
Well, the value of this discussion, I think, is clear. The conflict against organized crime is being fought simultaneously on multiple fronts: cultural, technological, and political.
Absolutely. It requires multi-pronged solutions that have to address both the immediate aspirational appeal of that digital lifestyle and the deep-seated underlying governance failures that allow it to flourish in the first place. There's certainly much more to explore here,